Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the Practice Perfect podcast. We are so excited to be here with you. And if you're here listening to this podcast, you're here because you want to know how to start your own practice or how to be more efficient in managing your healthcare practice. I want to announce that we have our amazing co host, Maya Turner, with us today. Maya, welcome to Practice Perfect.
Hey, everybody. Happy New Year. All of that good stuff. It's been wonderful so far. I'm so excited for this new year and this new podcast venture.
It's exciting, right? I think you and
Yes.
I, we're both kind of not new to podcasts now. We've been doing this for a little while,
Yeah.
and we wanted to come out with this amazing new show that is going to be sustainable long term for our organizations and those that listen to us, because it's really just an amazing thing to think about how far we've come in healthcare. I've been in
Yeah.
healthcare for 22, 23 years. How long have you been in healthcare, Maya?
30 years plus. So I've
You,
been around for a long time.
So we've been around the block, right? We've seen a few
Yes.
things.
Yeah. A couple.
We've
A
seen a couple
couple.
things go wrong, go right. And so I think it's about getting real, right? Getting real. What does it take to run a practice successfully? Um, we really try to not scare everyone, but it is big. It's scary. It's a leap when you start a practice. Any business you start up, it's crazy, right? And you can
Hmm.
think about, okay, am I going to go on my own? Am I going to have other physicians in my practice? Am I going to be joining a practice? Am I going to be bought out by private equity? What is the situation here, and what is the best way to go about this? So our first episode, we wanted to make it very exciting,
Hmm.
and let's talk about what you need to know first. How do you even start this process? So if you're excited, grab your coffee, grab your drink, whatever you're listening to, whatever you're drinking today. Let's start talking about how to start your own practice, and let's just make it fun and exciting. And we hope that you're here, and you're going to have fun with us today. So I'm excited. I'm excited. I'm excited to have this exciting venture. We are here, guys. We are here to have fun today. So let's do that. So the dream. Now we need to define our purpose. So why are you starting a practice? Now, Maya, what do our physicians or those that are starting a practice want to understand when they think about their why? What is a good thing to think about?
The best thing to think about is service. How are you going to service your patients? And making sure that that service is efficient, right? You can't have a service and not know how to service. So there are certain things that you have to think about when a practice is starting. How are you going to service your patients? What's going to happen? What would be the best case scenario? What would be the worst case scenario? And how to address that service to make it right?
Exactly, exactly. Now, I feel that there's a lot of concern with how current medical practices are run, which is why we're in the situation that we're in and why we need to kind of take a step back and think about why we're doing this. In recent years, I felt it as a patient. I know we've all felt it, where you walk into the medical office and you feel like cattle, right?
Yeah.
And they're just prodding you along, get you in the room, wait. You basically hurry up and wait, right?
Yeah.
And trying to figure that out. And so that's what we want to avoid. Now, we can't always avoid it, and I'm not saying that it's something that we can solve today. But like we want to get to, we want to get you closer to perfect, which is why this podcast exists, so that we can help you get a little bit closer. We can't attain perfection, but we can get as close as possible, hopefully. So we want you to build a space where your patients feel heard, they feel cared for, they're confident in the care they're going to receive. And not only your patients, but who else? Your team, your
Yeah.
staff. Oh,
Yes.
well, we're going to talk about staffing as well. Great stuff today. So I want to talk about how we define our patients. So let's talk about who we service, the patients, our demographics. So why is it important for us to look at demographics, Maya?
Well, first, if you're in a community of Medicare patients and you want to open a pediatric practice, you're not going to get a lot of workflow because all of the patients are out of the scope of the population that you're studying to service. Now, remember, the practice is about service, right? But you have to service the population that you're focusing on. So if your practice isn't able to service the patients that you are intending to service, then it kind of is counterproductive and it doesn't make the point of being of service because you're not servicing anyone. You're only servicing yourself because you're not in a population of that, of the intention of patients you're trying to serve.
Yes, exactly. So we think about our demographics. We in recent years have been doing a lot of research and work in reporting social determinants of health.
Yes.
And for many practices, that was a little scary to think about reporting that stuff. But I want to talk for a minute, not just from the billing side. Like, yeah, we know it's important for coding. We want to report that stuff. But why do we report codes the way we do? What does it do? It tracks things, right? It tracks data. And we're data people. We work on that side. We love data. And so we love to see how this plays out in the data that we look at with social determinants of health. I want to shout out to my amazing colleague, Jordan Johnson, for a minute, because a couple years ago, I think it's a couple years ago, he did a presentation at the Healthcare Advocate Summit, and it was about zip codes. Okay. So it was really fascinating, and it had a lot to do with the data we collect with the communities that we live in. And so I live in Northwest Arkansas, which is a very wealthy community and one of the more wealthier areas of the state of Arkansas. Little Rock has its areas, and in between we have a lot of poorer communities, lower income. They can't get a lot of access to care. And then right above my county in southern Missouri is a very poor county as well. And so sometimes they drive all the way to Northwest Arkansas. Sometimes it's an hour or so to get to a hospital, or they go north to Joplin, Missouri, and they still have to sometimes drive an hour or so. So that's a lot. Now, the average low income patient, what do you think is going to be more important to them when it comes to how they spend their money?
Well, I mean, and I hate to say it, but it's not always healthcare. It's
You're
food.
right.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's how they're going to survive. They're thinking about the next meal, the next day, really. So it's not healthcare. It definitely isn't. And it's all about what they can afford on that day. And I love that about the zip codes because the zip codes tell which counties and which areas are prone to be more sicker, which have more, and then they can also, don't get me started on data and numbers and all of that stuff. That's kind of like my wheelhouse as well. So yeah, I totally get that.
Absolutely. So those are the things that I think of when I think of, patients needing to understand how important their healthcare is. And as an organization wanting to be successful in your area, you need to make them understand. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that you can do. And we'll talk over this next season. We're going to talk a lot about, what we can do to help understand these things and make it fun for um, the audience here. I know sometimes these topics can be boring and monotonous, and oh, we're going to talk about data, we're going to talk about coding and billing, and not all of you are interested in that. But for those of you who are interested in making things successful, you have to think about all the pieces that are involved in running a healthcare practice. The business side, you cannot ignore it because you have to stay open, right? So we have to make
Yes.
sure that we're staying open for our organization. And then, I want to think about goals. Now, I love goals. I set goals for myself. I know you probably set your own goals, Maya, right?
Yes.
Absolutely, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. But the goal is to be successful. Now, what is your goal for your patient base? Like, so how many patients do you anticipate having your first year out? So let's think about that. Like, do you want to have, 100 patients, 500 patients? What is your goal? Because you might be a one physician practice. I feel like a smaller practice we could talk about is maybe like a one physician therapy practice, where They're very niche in what they do, and they don't want to necessarily get too big, but it's just them and they want to stay that way. And then you have your organizations that want to grow sustainably and they want to, scale their business, scale their practice to a point where I'm going to eventually bring on partners, but right now it's just me. How do I do that? So think about how many you want in the first year. Make it manageable as well. And then we're going to talk next week about patient engagement, but I really think it's important to measure the satisfaction of your patients. So, for instance, you need to know how to understand measuring the satisfaction of your patients. So, think about how to make this achievable. Now, Maya, what do you think about the training aspect of what we have to look at? Because it's a real specific issue that we see. And I think before you go into healthcare, you need to understand the training aspect of your team. We need to bring this team on, but they need training before we can even open the doors. I think that's another aspect we want to talk about. What do you think about that, Maya?
Okay. So when we're thinking about servicing the patients, you have to think about a team. You have to think about who is going to be a part of your team to make that successful. So of all things, you got to think about the service, you have to think about your team and the goals that are associated with creating an environment where your patients feel comfortable. So definitely something to consider when you're thinking about your practice and who's part of your team and who thinks like you and all of that good stuff.
Exactly. So goals are important. We all need them in our lives. So let's
Yes.
talk next about building that plan. So boring stuff, guys. We're going to talk about the boring stuff. Okay, here we go. So the business plan, the mission, the vision, the services, financial projections, all the business stuff. Now, get yourself an accountant. I will tell you firsthand, those of you who think you can do it on your own, you can't. You can't manage the business side without someone managing the numbers for you. You need to establish your legal structure. So, a legal structure, are you going to be an LLC? Are you going to be a corporation? Sole proprietorship? Oh my goodness, Maya. What do we know about this part of running a business? How crazy is this?
It's insane, right? And those of you who think about running a business and you don't solidify yourself as an LLC or an SC or a sole proprietorship, you're going to find yourself in a lot of trouble because people are not, the IRS is not going to recognize the write-offs that you want to take. Two, the second thing is you have to make sure that the setup is equally important when you're doing your accounting, your banking. They need all of that to set all of those things up. So it makes it important for the workflow to occur and for you to create business relationships by solidifying that you're an official business. These pop-ups where they're making cakes and cookies without all of that, that's something that's coming out of your own pocket. But when you're solidifying yourself to make profit, it's important to establish yourself as a business and making sure that all of the tax associated with that is tied to an employer identification number.
Exactly, exactly. And I'm telling you what, that tax ID is so important. We do credentialing, and I think I have memorized my client's tax ID number because I use it every day. So it's crazy. Now, an LLC, that's what I am currently with my business. And so
Same.
that's a limited liability company, and it's good for a small organization, small practice. You can be a multi-member LLC where you're more of like a partnership and you have legal obligations there tax wise, or you can be a single member LLC. And then you have a corporation. That's going to be more, really depending on how much money you end up bringing in. And maybe your first year, you're going to identify as an LLC, but then maybe the next year you see how much money you've made, right? And
Mm-hmm.
how you've grown. And now you're going to try to bring in investors and you're going to have a little more complex network, more paperwork, all paperwork, right? So things like that. So it could grow from there depending on how you want to grow. Now, in a hospital situation, you're going to be more of a corporation. You might be a for profit or non-profit. So those are things that we go into in the higher realms. But we're talking in this podcast about our small, mid, large size practices that are privately owned. We're not here to talk about the nuances with being owned by a hospital, because that on its own is its own animal. But we will talk about in this podcast about things to understand with those dynamics when you're actually communicating with those corporations, things you need to know. And here we come to our exciting world of licensure.
Yes.
So fun times, right? So the state licenses, you have to have a state license. As a physician, you have to have a state license. So before you even go into an organization, you're probably going to have some kind of understanding on the state licensure. Check your state board website for information on how to do that. But if you're going into being a physician, you should know you need a state license. They're going to ask for it, especially when you have an organization set up. There's the actual organizations that require you to give them your license are going to want to have that, right? You have to have an NPI, a national provider identifier. And especially your DEA. If you want to prescribe medication, you got to have that. And certifications. Are you board certified? Is that required, right? And then you also need to understand, and this is just a regulation that we all have to live by. All physicians need to understand HIPAA, HIPAA, right?
1P.
Yes.
And 1P, no
P.
PP. Well, no PP
No,
in
no,
HIPAA.
two double P's. Terry Fletcher will come after you if you spell it wrong. Telling you what. So let's talk about this for a minute, because this is my world, Maya. This is my credentialing world. Now, it's not just about getting credentialed and able to bill insurance companies. This is to show you legally can see patients. What can happen if you don't renew your license or your DEA? What happens to you legally?
You can go to jail because you're not considered a viable practice with licensure to perform the services that require for you to be a doctor. So, I mean, and I've seen DEA licenses be taken away and they still try to prescribe. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And so with that, and you have to use your DEA license the right way. Mm-hmm. They call it drug enforcement agencies for a reason. Schedule 1, Schedule 2, right? Those things are important. And if you're not licensed to do that, especially identifying the scope, if you're a nurse practitioner or what have you, then, and there are certain state laws that are associated with prescriptions when you're a mid-level provider. We haven't even talked about that, but that's important, especially with that, in order to service your patients, including prescriptions. I'm just saying.
Exactly. And the nice thing about this new show that we're doing that I'm so excited about is we're not tied down to a certain topic per season, and we just get to slow it down and really talk meaningfully about these topics. So yeah, we're going to have an entire episode on understanding Incident 2 and understanding mid-level providers, understanding collaboration agreements. Things like that, important. Things that we don't really think about, that we deal with all the time, the ins and outs. And again, it's not just about getting paid. Of course, the agencies that pay you also want these things, because they aren't going to pay you unless they know that you're actually, following the law as well, and that you're legally able to see their members, right? Because their members, they have to be responsible for them as well. Mm-hmm, so we want to make sure that we're considering those things. Now, oh, here we come. I feel like as we transition to this new section, let's talk about finances, budgeting, funding, things like that. So it's important to understand how we do that. Now, think about the cost to start a practice. So you have to have the building. You got to have the building. So we have to have a place for people to go, right? You got to find the right space. And I feel like it's also important to understand what kind of services you're going to offer, so you know what kind of building to get. Why is that important?
Well, one, location. And again, it's about service, right? The service area and the building has to be accommodating, right? So if you're going to have Medicare patients, do you have a wheelchair ramp? Do you have accessibility that's appropriate for your patients? Those things that you look for a place for your building, all of that makes a difference, right? So if you don't have that, you're creating more liability for yourself, which goes into the next thing, liability insurance. How does that all play into, the building that you select and those things that are code, right, for you to be able to service the population? Then you have to think about the building, the access, the risk that's associated with those types of things that people don't typically think about, right? How annoyed do you get when you try to walk through the door and the button doesn't work? Well, what if you're an elderly person and you try to get out, you push the door yourself, and you injure yourself trying to push because you're not that strong? I'm just saying. So that's important.
Yes, ADA compliance, guys. Really important. They do ask you that on a lot of applications, especially when you're enrolling in insurance. It can cost between $2,000 and $10,000 a month to reserve a space, depending on how large you are. So that's a huge cost. And of course, if you're on the larger side, you're going to hopefully have the revenue coming in to cover that. But that's why we're going to talk through this whole podcast about how you can make money compliantly. That's the whole goal of this, being successful. We're starting with episode 1 with the opening the doors part, because you got to open the doors, but before you open those doors, you need to be able to understand how to get there. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is technology. Okay, we are in 2024. We've got to have some awesome technology in our lives. I still, God love them, these old school providers who want to do paper. We love you. We know that it's hard. Technology's hard. I know. But we're in 2024. You have a whole new landscape. For instance, your insurance companies, they're all electronic. So they're probably not going to even accept a paper claim.
Right.
Some of them might be out there still trickling around, but most of them, and even paper applications for credentialing, I mean, it's unheard of. There are some forms that some payers still send you to fill out, but guess what? You can also fill those out electronically. So you want to be very cognizant of how you introduce technology into your practice. Your electronic health record system, let's talk about that. What is something you want to think about when you choose an EHR? We'll have a whole episode on this, but just on a basic level, Maya, what are some things you want to think about?
I'm trying not to burst at the seams, but sometimes it's not all about convenience with an EHR. You have to think about the compliance elements.
Yes,
If
yes.
you were to get an audit, and the only thing in your system is the notes, how are you keeping that HIPAA compliant? And with the EHR mandate, because I believe there's an EHR mandate for servicing those types
Yep.
of things. So if you don't have an EHR, then you're falling under mandate regulations that have been imposed. The only area that does not mandate EHR records are the skilled nursing facilities, and that's coming because they're auditing those. So I think, when you're thinking about a system, you got to think about your practice. You got to think about the population. You got to think about how are you going to house and manage your finances by the claims that you are producing, that the EHR should be able to intertwine the two for a seamless connection between your patient workflow and your finances, meaning a practice management system in addition to an electronic health record. All of those things should be in one system. When they're a la carte and you're using different systems, not only does it get confusing, you can't balance your AR because you don't know which claims have gone out. You always want to make sure that there's a process that is seamless and fluid for your patients that are seen on a daily basis and the claims that are produced based upon your daily accounts receivable, called other words known as the DAR reports. You need to reconcile those every single day. And the reporting aspect, right? How an analysis is when your workflow is appropriate. Making sure that you can pull which providers are performing well with their CPT coding and their revenue and their productivity versus the ones that are not. All of that makes a difference, and being able to analyze how your practice is doing. But if you don't have a system that's able to do that, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot and you're going to wonder where your money is. And then you're depending on third-party billing companies to do it for you, when in reality, they could be cheating you out of a lot of money because they're not telling you everything that they're billing because it's not fluid. So I think all of those things are extremely important when you're thinking about an EHR system, and then have someone like us, hello, to give you an evaluation of the optimization opportunities before you open your doors. Because you got to think your patients. You got to think about the ability, to service your patients the right way by means of claims and invoicing. So, I mean, there's a whole lot. I mean, I could burst at the seams to talk about all of that, but
I get it. I get it. We're all there. Now, you made an interesting point because, you know, the last thing a physician needs to think about is all of these other aspects that they can actually have help with, because they need to focus on the just starting the practice one, but making it successful, like, to go live, you need people in your corner. And so, talking about a one doc practice, we have a question from Vanessa on LinkedIn. How do you persuade a one doc practice that they can't do it alone and they can't do it all? And is there an ROI? So, a good question, because a return on investment, you have to be able to show a physician that. So, like for us as consultants, when we go into a practice and we say, hey, we can help you with this, we're not just saying, trust us because we're pretty, trust us because of this and that. Like, trust us because we have a true understanding of what you're about to go through. We've
right.
done this. I have helped organizations open practices from the very beginning,
Same.
where we help them pick an EHR. We help them figure out, can they have an OR in their office?
Yeah.
Like, what are the rules with that, and all these little things? How to do it right? How to staff appropriately? How to make
Yeah.
sure your staff is up to the task and training, all that. You got to show them, okay, potentially this is how many, here's your payer mix, these are the contracts you have in place. If you do it right, you potentially could make this much, per procedure or per month if you do these procedures. This is how much staff you need technically to do this job. And then what is your return on investment for the staffing? So let's talk about staffing for a minute. I think it's important that we transition to our staffing. Staffing is really important. So let's talk about staffing.
So when you
Staffing.
think about staffing, you have to make sure that you have positions in place where you're providing the training or they already have the skill set. You can't run a practice and train someone at the same time and expect for it to be efficient. You have to train or hire people and pay them for the knowledge that they have. You cannot,
Thank you,
you
Maya.
you
Thank you.
cannot run a practice efficiently and try to train and run a practice and not have the skill set at the same time. It will not work. Not at all. You're going to find yourself, braiding your eyebrows at night because you don't know what's going to happen. You're not going to know what's going to happen on a day to day because you're stressed out. And the perfect scenario of this is the Ghostbusters with Melissa McCarthy, and they had the very, right, the very beautiful Hemsworth. Oh, Chris Hemsworth.
Oh.
Lord. But he was gorgeous, but he didn't know anything. So how are you gonna I'm sorry. So it's just like, how are you gonna run a practice with the beautiful Hemsworth, but you're not able to come up behind me? They only kept him around because he was fine. But as far as everything else, they did. So the point that I'm trying to make is you don't want to do the double work. You can have someone that has a pretty face, but are they eligible to do the work? Are they capable of doing the work and keeping up with the workflow? Right? Again, it's about the skill set and paying for the skill set when you're looking for people, quality people that's going to make your practice efficient.
Exactly. Now, there are other things you want to think about, which we will talk about in detail over this entire podcast, like marketing. We're going to
Yeah.
have extensive episodes, guys, on billing and coding, AR,
Oh my
denials,
gosh.
appeals, prior
Yeah.
authorizations, you name it, it's coming, guys. It's coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
We are
Yeah.
going to be talking to some of our key advisors at Healthcare Inspired, which is our sponsor for the show, as well as Turner Expert Consulting. So we're going to be talking to a lot of our advisors. We are going to have legal experts on the show. We already have one lawyer lined up already for you guys in the near future. So we're so excited to have that coming. We have a lot of people that we trust
Yeah.
with our businesses that we run as advisors in healthcare.
Yeah.
And we want to share those people with you
Yeah.
because we're not selfish. We don't
We're
think
not.
that what we know should stay in here and what we've learned should stay in here. It needs to be expressed. It needs to be
Yes.
shared. And if anyone out there thinks that they are going to be successful by keeping things to themselves, it just really shows what kind of person you are if you're selfish and want to keep your knowledge to yourself. Share it with the world, because
Yeah.
those are the kind of people that are truly successful in whatever business that you're in. Now, let's just talk as we close out today. I want to remind everyone why we're doing this. We're in 2025 and we are seeing an unprecedented shortage of practices, a shortage of physicians.
Yeah.
It was estimated that there's a shortage of 200,000 to 450,000 nurses expected this year.
Hmm.
Burnout is real, guys. We
Yeah.
have cybersecurity issues. We had the Change Healthcare attack of 2024. Huge issues. I don't
Hmm.
even want to get into the HIPAA breaches that are at an all-time high
Yeah.
as of 2024.
Yeah.
Over
Ransomware.
150%. Yes, it
Yeah.
was over 150% increase.
Yeah. I mean, and I could
That's
think.
it. I can't even.
I mean, if you don't know of anyone who's had a HIPAA breach or a breach where they literally call it ransomware for a reason. I'm just saying. And as consultants, as people that are in the industry, one, the EHR system, the safeguards that are related to the EHR system is all about HIPAA compliance and what you're subject to when it comes to ransomware and breaches. So you got to think about the security. That's another thing that is important when you're thinking about an EHR. How secure is the data, right? If they don't have security for your data and you don't have security with your data, with your systems and things like that, how do you expect for it to be secure? You are going to pay a ransom.
This is
Yeah.
true. This is true.
Yes.
And yes, and I will tell you, like since the Change Healthcare attack, like eventually they had that message in between last year from United Healthcare where they turned it into finally authentication. When you logged into the UHC provider portal, you actually got it connected to your two-factor authentication finally, which
Yeah.
was to me like insane that it wasn't already a thing. One of the largest insurers in the country who is deeply connected to Change Healthcare, we know obviously, like didn't have MFA set up. Like that's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
real issue.
Yeah.
So all those things combined show us where we are in 2025. And
Yeah.
there's a lot more data, a lot more information we're going to be sharing that we can't share in one episode, obviously. But we hope this gives you a
Yeah.
little insight, little insight into why we do what we do and why we feel like listening to this podcast is going to save you money. It's going to make you money. It's
Yeah.
going to make you want to come to work in the morning. It's going to make you feel excited that you get to help real people with real problems and not worry about the other things that you can have people help you with.
Yes.
And how to do it successfully. So I want to thank everyone for joining the first episode of Practice Perfect. It's exciting that we're here. I want to take a minute and thank some lovely people. I want to thank the amazing Gabriel Fass with Highland Productions. He is our music composer and he is our editor. He's doing amazing things. And I thank you to our amazing producer right here live, Gloria Ataga from Glow Marketverse. Thank you so much, Gloria. And we have, of course, some amazing things coming your way, amazing guests. Next time, guys, we're going to be talking about patient engagement. So stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Practice Perfect podcast. Until next time.